First of all, thank you very much for being here.
No problem.
Let's go ahead and start from day one, Smitty. Where were you born and raised?
Born and raised in Miami, Florida, an area actually called Opelika. Ended up in Carroll City, which was kind of a great place to have been born if you wanted to end up doing what I did, because as a youngster I got a chance to work as a ball boy for the Miami Dolphins on one day and then be at the Fifth Street Gym watching Muhammad Ali train on another day. But born and raised in the magic city of Miami.
What were you like as a kid growing up? Were you quiet? Were you shy? Were you outgoing?
I'll let you guess on that. Pretty vociferous, pretty animated. In fact, I did a lot of talking. Maybe that's why I didn't grow taller than I did, because I spent so much time talking and not growing. But yeah, as a youngster, I think all the athletes would kind of get a kick out of me from the first time I met Ali, or even at the Dolphin training camp, with Paul Warfield, who went on to become a Hall of Fame wide receiver, and he was kind of the first one to introduced me to radio and television. He got such a kick out of me talking and my knowledge of sports and in particular, boxing and football, that he would have me on his radio and television show when I was just a young lad growing up. So yeah, I was pretty outgoing. I loved sports, and but certainly loved to talk.
And what other sports did you watch or were you into when you were a kid growing up?
Pretty much everything. I mean, I grew up, obviously, boxing and football, the first loves, but I mean, whether it be, golf and Jack Nicklaus, or tennis and Borg and McEnroe, or horse racing and Secretariat, or, the Lakers, the Yankees, I loved all sports, and, kind of made it my passion to follow all of that, because I had a goal as a youngster to someday have my own, radio and then television show and be a sports talk host. I kind of grew up as a kid, going to bed listening to sports talk radio, WIOD and WGBS in Miami, and so that was kind of my goal. So I tried to kind of follow all sports, but with a particular emphasis on boxing and football.
How was your household like? Were you close to your parents, your siblings?
You know what? My mother kind of raised me as a single parent. They got my folks got divorced early on, and it kind of, because my mother worked at night, I would sit home and wait on her to get home, and I wouldn't be able to relax until my mom got in. So I would always watch late night television and became a huge fan of Johnny Carson. And I always said, someday I got to do something like that. And I remember the first time I met Muhammad Ali when I was just a kid, and he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, I recently saw you on Johnny Carson, and I want to have a show, a TV show, and do a talk show on television, which in essence is kind of what I would end up doing. I wish I had Johnny's salary or the salary of the late night guys today, but I did end up with a talk show. So.
And in that picture, actually, that you took with Muhammad Ali that you have, did you know at that time who you were taking that picture with?
Oh, absolutely. I stalked out at the Fifth Street Gym. My uncle told me that, he knew from watching Ali train at the famed Fifth Street Gym, where to stand. And there was a drugstore. If you walk straight down the old rickety steps at the Fifth Street Gym and turn to your right and made a right turn, what was next to it was an old drugstore. In fact, the gym was actually built on top of the drugstore. And I went to the corner and I looked and I waited and I saw two dark, tall figures coming towards me. And I was, of course, waiting on Muhammad Ali. And he got right up and he kind of stopped. He was in conversation with another gentleman. Might have even been Rockman, his brother. I was so fascinated seeing Ali right there, and he looked down at me, and I had this little jacket that my mother started to get mad at me for doing this until it ended up, but I took a magic marker and I wrote Muhammad Cassius Clay Ali on this jacket, and he looked down at it, put his arm around me, and from that point I kind of knew Ali. We went up the stairs of the gym, of the Fifth Street Gym, and he took me behind the ropes with him, and that was what would become my first meeting with Muhammad Ali.
And what did he think of the name Cassius Clay in parentheses?
You know what? I think he just thought it was creative. He got such a kick out of me now that I think back about it. And I think because at one point I think he had said to me, because I kept talking, and he said, I think what his words were something like, "So little white kid, what do you want to be if you ever grow up?" And I said, "I want to be like Johnny Carson." And I think he said something along the lines of, "You know what, man? Yeah, I think you will become a talk host because you're just like me. You never shut up." And so that was a little bit foretelling. It's funny how some of those moments, come back. But he didn't mind the Cassius Clay reference. I don't think he certainly didn't mention it. And he knew a little kid like me certainly was doing it, out of just that. I knew those were all of his names, so I wanted them all included.
Did you see him different after that? Did you, every time you saw Muhammad Ali thereafter on TV or boxing, did you think of him different because he gave you such a nice memory there?
Yeah, and I spent so much time with him, leading up to that first epic fight with Smokin' Joe Frazier. And every time, I would come into the gym or he'd see me, "My main man," and he'd let me, through the ropes. And it was just totally different to the point, actually, when he lost to that first fight that he lost to Joe Frazier, March 8, 1971, I got physically sick. I really came home and became ill, because of that. It's ironic I'm talking to you now as we're actually editing my show with Joe Frazier that we did a few months ago. And I was even telling Joe some of those stories. I think Joe got a kick out of the fact that Joe was the one who made me sick, the way he beat Ali that first time on March 8, 1971. But, yeah, it made a major difference and impression. And even when I would see Ali, and the last time I really had a chance to see him was when I called his daughter's fight against Christy Martin. Myself and the late Nick Charles did that fight on pay-per-view, and Ali was in the ring that night and still remembered me.
Well, yeah, I thought it was a quick maybe picture you might have taken with him. I didn't know that you spent so much time with him.
Yeah, absolutely. Used to be with him all the time. In fact, I'm in my office right now, and I'm looking at a picture of a $20 bill that he gave me that I still, as broke as I've been, I've never spent that $20 bill. I'm so glad that, because I'm one of the few that can carry on with the stories about Ali, other than, the guys like Angelo and all the ones that were around him. I was a younger kid around him, but I spent a great deal of time with him, when he made his comeback, and, again, so much time with him. I think that one picture you're referring to that I have on on my Facebook and other things was like just about 2 weeks before that epic first showdown with Smokin' Joe Frazier.
And when you weren't at the gym there hanging out with Ali, how were you as a student in school?
Funny tie-in. My 6th grade teacher, Mr. Wilson. We all have a favorite teacher, don't we? Somebody, and Mr. Wilson was a huge fan of Ali, and he actually let me go, and when Ali would train, and he let me go and skip school to write for the school paper, because I was always the sports editor at pretty much every paper, and so it all kind of tied in. I was very good at journalism, and I ended up going to a school on a football scholarship. I played a little high school football and was a good little receiver. Wasn't big enough to go much beyond a small college, but I was really dedicated to my journalism and my writing and things of that nature. But according to every teacher, what I did best was speak and talk, and too much at times. But I was an okay student, but very good at what I was. And I'm not, for kids listening, hey, you should get it all together. Your math, your science, everything. I just was blessed that I knew what the heck I was going to be, and I gave all the emphasis to what I was going to be, and I knew I was going to end up behind a microphone and on television, and writing is a big part of that. So that's what I really prided myself in.
How did you get into getting yourself into the ring?
I was a hell of a little athlete at Miami Carroll City, which is one of the great high schools in the country for producing college football players. I was a really good wide receiver, but I was just a real little guy. And I went to 2 years to a school, University of Minnesota Tech, and played there and started. And then I transferred to the University of Nebraska, Omaha. Marlon Briscoe, who was actually the first NFL black quarterback, he went to school there, and he knew me from my days working as a ball boy with the Dolphins. By the way, I was a ball boy for the Miami Dolphin team, went 17-0, the only unbeaten team still in the history of the National Football League. Because I realized, and Marlon sat me down and said, Smitty, you're just not going to be big enough to go any further. I kind of decided to quit right then. And because I hadn't gotten athletics out of my system, I decided to, drop some weight and box. and, I looked really good in the gym. I remember the first day I went to the Fifth Street Gym. I had no amateur fights, went to the Fifth Street Gym, and I got in there, I think it was with Anthony Collins, who was the Florida middleweight champion at the time, and, actually, I think I bloodied his nose, and he bloodied my nose and mouth, and I had a brief, 3-year fight career, and the bottom line was I realized by having no amateur experience, I wasn't going to be able to compete with the guys down there. They were all excellent Latin fighters, and I got a chance to work inside the ring with guys like Alexis Arguello. Duran was down there. I got to train with Johnny De La Rosa when he was getting ready to take on Juan Laporte, and I just was smart enough to know, with no amateur fights, as good an athlete as I am, I'm not going to be able to deal with these guys unless I learn how to take a beating, and I think 3 years and 8 cracked ribs taught me that I would be much safer behind the microphone. I was lucky enough to never get, I never got knocked down, never got stopped, won more than I lost, and got to train with some just phenomenal fighters. I remember the great Alexis Arguello adjusting my right hand one time in the ring, telling me how to get more torque on it, and 4 or 5 days later I knocked out a Haitian fighter in round 2 from doing that, and these are things that would go on, and they're so valuable for me now if I call a fight or when I'm in the ring with a great fighter on my show in this corner. But that's how I ended up in boxing, and after about 3 years I decided, hey, this is not going to be the profession for me without, and I really gained a lot of respect for what a great amateur career can mean, because I didn't have any, and I can see why in our fighters today, a lot of them aren't as good because the American fighters, because our amateur program has gone downhill.
Do you think it's important to have an extensive amateur record or experience in the ring?
Ali, Frazier, Sugar Ray Leonard, George Foreman, Oscar De La Hoya, one of the best fighters in the world today, Andre Ward, Amir Khan, the
84 Olympic group also.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You have to. And here's the, we've got, we could spend 3 or 4 hours on the problems with boxing today, but that's one of the biggest ones. People say to me all the time, that boxing's it's tremendously popular in the UK, in Canada, in the Philippines, but it's not popular as much here, and part of the problem is, we don't have our amateur programs, and we don't have the kids coming up, and there's a couple of things I'm working on that I can't disclose now, but, we need this desperately. It is so important to learn the fundamentals, coming up. And these guys that, like the guys that are Antonio Tarvers and Bernard Hopkins and these guys that are around today that are a little older, you can see with the amateur program, that's why they can compete with kids, because the kids coming up, didn't have this kind of teaching, and it's so important.
Absolutely, and people said it's not really a big deal to not have an amateur career. Look at Chavez and look at Tyson. They came out with some of the biggest purses ever, and they didn't have too much of an amateur career.
Well, remember, Mike Tyson should have, represented the United States. He had a good career, but Mike was more suited towards the pros because of his knockout style. But also, Mike Tyson didn't have a long career. There was only a 4-year span where Mike was brilliant. Part of that's because of his height. I've long been on the theory, and I've told everybody, they finally realized it now in New Zealand with David Tua, that there's never been a great short heavyweight who's been anything past the age of 32. They've all been finished, whether it be Dempsey, Marciano, Frazier. Tyson was actually on the second half after the age of 24. Part of that was the incarceration, but remember, he got knocked out at age 24, but he also had a, great tutelage under Cus D'Amato, who had been with so many, including Floyd Patterson. So Mike got the great training, especially for his style, because when Floyd Patterson fought the same type of style. Fortunately, that worked out. I don't know how many great boxers Cus D'Amato had, but he was great with the guys who could bob and weave and do the peekaboo, that's for sure.
And all his fighters, he branded them with something where they were loyal to him to this day, or till the day they died, whether it had been Patterson, whether it had been Jose Torres, and Kevin Rooney always has a shirt on with Cus D'Amato on it.
Yeah, I think it's passion. I think that's the word. Passion is what he...
Of course, always brings up Cus D'Amato and gets teary-eyed about it.
That's a good point you bring up. When I remember when we did the entire show with Mike, and he got very emotional when he mentioned his kids and Cus not being able to see his kids. He really got emotional at that point during the interview. I think it was the passion thing that that Cus instilled in his. He was very passionate towards his fighters, no doubt.
So your career here finished. Let's say the day it finished. What kind of things came to mind as far as what you were going to do next? Did you know you were going to stay in the sport somehow, or did you have other plans?
You know what? I knew I was going to go right after my radio career. I was married at the time, had a couple of kids, so money became an issue, and I did whatever jobs I could do, to make ends meet, and I bought a little suitcase, or a little briefcase rather, that looked impressive, even though it was only about $25. And I went to every radio station in Fort Myers, Florida, knocked on every door until somebody hired me. And I went into, all of a sudden, I had my own 5-day-a-week talk show. Everybody else, like one radio station, a guy named Jim C. Miller, I walked in, I was exhausted, tired from going to all the stations and getting turned down, and I said, and he hired me on the spot and said, you start Monday, kid. And so that's kind of where it all began, and that began my radio career, and I did sports talk radio, and again, back to one of your earlier questions about, I covered all sports, and that helped because at that time, on my show, would be, one day might be Jim Brown, the great running back. The next day might be Willie Mays, the former great baseball player. The next day might be, Arthur Ashe. I mean, I literally had these kind of names on because through my contacts with the Dolphins and Ali, I was able to connect with the biggest names in sports and get them on my show. In fact, it's funny because a lot of times my ex-wife would get upset because our phone bills would exceed what I was being paid. Because remember back then there weren't cell phone plans and all that. We had to use phone lines, and
long distance charges are a lot too.
Oh gosh, yes, and so I can remember $1,000 phone bills, and but it all paid off, and thank God, I was able to do, what I was always, I felt, put on this earth to do, and so I was. That's why, man, I believe in those things, desire to do something, specific goal, and a plan. When I do, speeches, I tell people that to have have desire, that's the most important thing, and then have a specific goal, and then have a plan. And I was able to execute those things, and having a sports career made me disciplined that I could do those things.
And what do you think prepared you for how you talked about at any time you could have interviews from Willie Mays to this person to that person? How did you prepare yourself with all the information? I mean, obviously there was in the internet back then.
That's a great question because, the kids today, they don't even know what a damn typewriter is. I had to use typewriters, and there was no internet. Absolutely. There was a thing called the library and sports almanacs and Sports Illustrated and calling other athletes, calling a Paul Warfield and asking him about a Jim Brown, calling a Willie Mays and asking him about a Hank Aaron. And what helped me so much, too, is that a reporter did a story about me. He said I was a name-dropper extraordinaire, and I was, because I had to be. I wasn't working at a big station or anything, and I owned my own radio show, so I would use names. I would say I'm a buddy of Ali's or I'm a buddy of Warfield's, and that would endear. Like when my first television interview I did was with Hammer and Hank Aaron. Still to me, the prolific home run king, because I was way before steroids. And what helped was that I told him I was a friend of Paul's. And if you were a friend of Paul's, then you had, and if you knew Ali and you were the little white kid that Ali, hey, it endeared me to these other men. Working with the Dolphins, the only it just all kind of fell into place, man. Thanks to God.
And who came up with the idea of you have your own boxing interview show? How did that come about?
The family and I, we packed up and left, because I started out at a little 1,000-watt station in Fort Myers, Florida. I ended up getting on several other stations, and then I ended up getting a show in Tampa. I was commuting to Tampa and back and forth, and then I landed on the Talk America radio network and went syndicated, and I was doing all this radio, and I was coming out to Vegas a lot, covering the fights for Don King or for Showtime, and, setting my radio show up from, the MGM or the Hilton, and sometimes it would be Trump Plaza in Atlantic City, but I started spending a lot of time in Vegas. I liked it here, and I decided, my ex-wife and I had a talk, and I said, maybe we ought to roll the dice and move to Vegas, and, we did that. And I came here, and all of a sudden, I hooked up with a network called USSB. They had a Channel 900 all boxing channel. So I was doing radio, started to do fights for them, started doing fights for Cedric Kushner and Don King and Artie Palula, all the different promoters, worked with the likes of Al Bernstein and Larry Michael and, all these different other broadcasters, the Colonel Bob Sheridan, who I grew up listening to, doing fights. And after a while, a lot of that television started to dry up. I was still doing radio, but getting bored with it, and I made a decision that my ex said, you ought to just do the same thing you did with your radio, do your own TV show. And I said, how? I said, okay, I'm going to quit radio and do that, and I did. And then I said, well, all of a sudden I realized, how the hell am I going to do this? Didn't really know how, and then I put the pieces together and met my producer, John Hyatt. We put together a script and a budget, and of course we didn't make that budget because there was nobody in Vegas at the time that was willing to spend the kind of money we wanted to do for the type of show that we were going to do. And I said, let's simplify this. Let's make it an interview show with an in-ring segment. And my producer said, that'll be boring. Nobody will like it. And I called up a number of stations that knew me as the blonde guy that did the fights, the color commentator guy, Smitty, and they all took a shot at it. And it became on April the 1st, 2004, the show launched on the Empire Sports Network, which was out of Buffalo, but on Direct and Dish. And ever since then, we've never been off the air even 1 week. We've been on all kinds of different networks that are on Direct TV and Dish Network and the America One Network, and we were on the Black Family Channel. I think you saw us on that at some time. So since April the 1st, 2004, there hasn't been a week that we haven't been on syndication, and right now we have a great group of affiliates, Comcast West and Sports Time Ohio, that carry us, and we also have NESN, the New England Sports Network. We're launching in a week or so on Cablevision in New York. We're on America One, and so that's kind of how it all started. We set out with that plan, and I had the desire to do it. We had a specific goal, a half-hour show, and then the plan, and then we were able to execute it, and we just started sitting down with all the fighters and interviewing them, and they all got a kick out of me jumping in the ring. Nobody else had ever done that with them before, and they knew that I knew my way around the ring a little bit from being an ex-fighter, and that's where it all started.
So that happened on April 1st of 2004. On March 31st of 2004, knowing that the dice was going to be rolled the next day, how did you feel?
I felt fantastic. I mean, it was almost like a roller coaster because once the Empire Network agreed to carry us, we had to get so many shows done so fast that it became a blur. And fortunately I jumped on with some of the guys like Wayne McCulloch, who were close to me, the former bantamweight champion, and then there was Holyfield, and then the late Diego Corrales. There were so many guys in Vegas. That's why it was such a blessing to be in Vegas. They were either fighting here, or living here, training here, and we just, powered into it. And when the show first launched, I was very proud because, I had accomplished, that goal. And in fact, it's funny because that's one of those things where when that happens, when that moment happens, sometimes it's hard to exceed that level because that's, even if you get on bigger networks, people say, oh, what does it mean going on this? It wouldn't matter if I went on ESPN tomorrow. It would never be any bigger than going on that little network, that we started on because it was, again, because we did it on our own, so that was a tremendous moment for John and myself and the small group of people that work with us.
Well, then let me ask you something. Now you know what the success of what you do became, but let's say before all that happened and before you started doing the show, what did people think of doing a show like that? Like if you went home and told your family or your friends or people that helped you out there later, when you brought up what you thought the format of your show was going to be, what did they think of that plan?
People that knew me knew that if I said I was going to do it, so it shall be written, so it shall be done. So they just were asking me the hows and the logistics and whatever. A lot of people said it would never work because it's boxing. You're not backed by a network. You're not backed by a promoter. You're not backed by you're not a millionaire. So you're not going to be able to get it on the air. You're not going to be able to keep it on the air. You're not going to be able to get sponsors. And, again, that's the naysayers were always out there. And what would always feel so good is while they were saying that, I'm crawling in the ring with Mike Tyson and Evander Holyfield. And every time, by the grace of God, I would call a network up, they would all take a chance on the show. They needed programming. We weren't facilitated with the best production quality at the time, but they didn't care because it wasn't so much about Smitty. I wish it was. It was about the guest. Half-hour interviews and in-ring segments with the likes of a Tyson or a Holyfield, or even a guy like Eddie Mustafa Muhammad or a Carlos Palomino. The boxing fans couldn't get enough of it. And these networks that would do deals with us, we always exceeded our contracts. So it worked out good. But to me, hearing no's and whatever, you've heard this from interviewing so many other people. That's what motivates you. When you hear can't. I always, when I hear can't, I don't even hear the T. I just think of CAN.
And how did you come up with the name In This Corner?
Originally we were going to call it Smitty's Ringside Seat, which I had a radio show called that, and that was going to be more of a show with news, half hour of news and whatever, and then an interview segment and an in-ring, but cost a lot more money to produce a show like that. So I said, okay, we're sitting down with the fighter, we're going to get in the ring in this corner. It just seemed to work.
Who thought of the format of the show, that you guys were going to do a part interview segment and then a part in-ring segment? Who thought of that?
Yeah, I wrote the whole thing out. In fact, John, my producer, and he'll admit it today, he was one of the ones that said it wouldn't work because it would be too boring, and but he found that after a while it did work, and he was a huge fan of the in-ring segment. I mean, he loved that when I told him that idea. And in fact, he'd like to see me do even more of these in-ring segments, and I guess it looks like what's going to happen now is we're even going to start, I don't know if my old body's going to hold up, but I think we're even going to start incorporating the in-ring segments on our internet, even with younger fighters coming up, and we may unveil something like that. Thanks to our great sponsor, Tecate. In fact, you might be the first one that just got that news that we're going to start doing more of that. But it's easy for the legends to know not to beat me up. Hopefully these young kids won't make a mistake and, realize that this is because it gets interesting in there sometimes. We've had some phenomenal moments. But, yeah, John was always a believer that the in-ring segment would work, and he's actually really looking forward to editing some shows that are just going to be compilations of in-ring segments, even when you're in there with a Chris Bird. At the time, Chris Bird was like heavyweight champion. It was a great in-ring segment with a boxer, and then you get in there against a guy like Palomino, who could box and punch, or then you get in there with a guy like Mike Tyson, and you know what he did. So, well, it was dangerous with Mike Tyson. A quick funny story is that I have a little bridge, and Mike tapped me, but he has heavy hands, and that bridge came loose, and I had to go to the dentist the next day. So that was interesting. And it's funny because guys like Bernard Hopkins, who were just demonstrating some of the ways to hit the back of the legs and the hips, and you don't feel anything at the time. You're in your zone and you're shooting, but then the next day I'm wondering what the heck's wrong with my leg, and then I realized that was courtesy of Bernard Hopkins, and you always have respect. I joke and kid a lot with the fighters, but I have a great deal of respect for what they do and them allowing me to get in there, with them. And it's funny now, I feel flattered when the young fighters like an Andre Ward or a Tim Bradley or an Amir Khan come up to me and they're looking forward to doing the in-ring with me. That's very flattering.
And is that why you stay in such good shape? I mean, you told me that you work out probably every day of the week. I mean, you look like you go in there with, either Israel Vasquez or Vic Darchinyan. Do you always stay in shape because you know that you're going to be getting in the ring with these guys? Yeah, and that's well, I do it obviously, a little bit of vanity, and I do it because I respect what they do. I'll work out. Somebody asked me, how do you want to go out? If I die working out, that would be okay. There's a few ways I could think of to pass away, and that would be one of them. But yeah, I do the boxing workout. I mix it up with the heavy bag, the speed bag, the double in bag. I don't do mitts. So that's the funny thing. Everybody's doing the mitts these days. We never did them in my day, so I still don't do it. I've done a mitt workout before, and I like to go walk in the desert at night and dodge the coyotes here in Las Vegas. So yeah, I stay in good shape, because I want to try to do that, and I think it
it's a better look on camera when you're in the ring and you're not, extremely overweight or whatever. That would take away from the segments. And I got to tell you something, the fighters do one heck of a job, as you've witnessed. They really get into it, explaining. They really seem to come alive when they're explaining how they fight and how they fought. And it's really, sometimes even the shy fighter in the interview, boy, you jump in the ring and, man, they have a glow about them, and they do a great job. And you really realize that this is a science. It's not just getting in there and throwing punches and whatever. It's not MMA. It's real science.
And actually, Diego Corrales is a good example of that. He seemed like the quiet, shy guy. He didn't even look like a boxer when you were interviewing him. But he gets in the ring, he could get physical there.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that one because we're editing that show this week. We go in there and do the wraparounds for it, and I put some pictures on my Facebook of Diego and I. My producer's burning me a copy of the DVD so I can look at. Because this is we did 2 shows with Diego and a lot of interviews, and this will be sort of a tribute. So it's going to be a bit haunting, and it was funny because I don't know if it'll make air, but there was really something weird that happened that when we were doing the in-ring with Diego, there was something when he said he was in the ring with me and threw a punch and was trying to make an emphasis on it, and then right as he did that, lightning struck and all the power went out. It was the craziest, weirdest experience. I know it made the air the first time the show ran, but yeah, he will be missed. He died way too young. I have a comment and a quote that I always use about fighters. I think they're the most common and yet uncommon of all professional athletes.
And is it hard to get these boxers to go in the ring with you and do that segment, or are they more than happy to do it most of the time?
The most difficult thing we find is if there's any press people that work with the fighters, they're the difficult ones, not the fighters. They're great. But you have certain press people that still to this day that don't understand what we do. They don't understand that we don't sit there with a mic with a panel of other internet guys or radio guys or whatever. We do something different. We do a one-on-one interview with an in-ring segment that takes time. And we understand most fighters don't like to do something like this the week of their fight. Some do. Some don't care, but some don't, and we respect that. But the fighters themselves, we've gotten such a reputation of this that, we don't have, not too many are against doing it. And there have been a couple times, though, that they were worried that if we did the in-ring before they had a fight, I remember Paulie Malignaggi being concerned, is Ricky Hatton going to see this? Because Ricky Hatton had already done our show in an in-ring, and we said, no. By the time this show airs, your fight will already have happened. So that kind of thing and it will happen from time to time. But the fighters usually love it, and if they're not sure about it, once they get in there, they really dig it because, they realize that I know what I'm talking about, and they get a chance to explain what they do so well, and so yeah, it's been a real popular segment with the fighters. Julio Cesar Chavez is one that we have not. We're pretty close to finalizing a few things that is going to put our show in. I think we're going to do a Spanish version. I'm really excited about that, and I cannot wait to get in the ring with. His son's not ready for me yet. Julio, I can't wait to get in the ring with.
What holds the show from featuring boxers like Eric Morales or Marco Antonio Barrera, Juan Manuel Marquez, or Julio Cesar Chavez Sr.? Is it the language barrier, or what keeps them from having a segment on your show there?
I'll answer that by saying, ask me what my biggest regret is in life. And it's 2 of them. Number 1, I probably should have been an actor. But the other one is I grow up in Miami. And I don't learn Spanish, other than asking Cuban girls how to go out with me. That's all I knew. And, that is my biggest regret, because nobody's more fan of the Latin fighters than me. And one of the things that that's in the works is for a Latin version of the program, but also documentaries on Mexican fighters, Puerto Rican fighters, so it's a big regret I have, because it would have made me a ton more money, if I could interview in both languages. So I really regret that, but that's something we've been able to work around now. We've got tons of guys that want to do, be the translator for us. Also a couple young ladies. We don't know exactly how we're going to do it yet, but we are going to do it. In fact, probably the first show that we'll do in Spanish is with a fighter you may have heard of him, Manos de Piedra, Roberto Duran. Which is coming up.
Should you do something like that, where you get one of those guys on your show, do you think you would have a stand-in to do it for you, or would you want to do it yourself personally?
Yeah, the interview I would want to do myself with a translator. They're asking to, but it's very important. I'm sure you know this better than me. It's very important, though, to make sure that myself, the translator, and the guest are all on the same page. Because the translation, I would, want the question to be asked the way I'm asking. I want the right answer, and I do a lot of interviews now, and everyone we'll hear things like that. That's not what the fighter said to Smitty. That's so, and I don't want to begrudge any or demean any interpreter, but I don't know. But there's some that are phenomenal that we've worked with.
And I would love to see an Eric Morales in there, or a Marco Antonio Barrera, or a...
Hey, you know who my favorite would be right now? I mean, you would think all those, and all those are great. But for me, my favorite would be Ricardo Lopez, who I think was as good a Mexican fighter as anybody you've named, maybe even better.
And unfortunately, he's always going to be the most underrated of all of them. Also,
size has a lot to do, or lack thereof. But yeah, I can't. I would love to, and even the Puerto Rican fighters. I guess. Felix Trinidad should have done the same thing. He should have looked, because I can imagine how much more money Trinidad would have made, had he had learned how to speak English. And even with Puerto Rico, there's the, whatever, when you go over and interview some of those, and a Sergio Martinez now, we've run into that. So, there's so many, and again, those guys, and I got to say, the Latin fighters are about as gracious with their time. They all get along with me. I love them, too, because most of them, as much as I can't wait, Lennox Lewis is waiting to do my show, and as much as I can't wait to get in the ring with Lennox, it's going to look a little bit silly. I'm much more geared towards being in the ring with Morales and Chavez and Ricardo Lopez, but and those guys I cannot wait. And so you asked the $1 million question. That the reason we haven't, I mean, we have them on InThisCornerTV.com and all of our web platforms, our YouTube page, but we don't do it as long-form interviews on In This Corner because of the language barrier.
I'm sure you liked all the guys that you've been in the ring with or interviewed, but who would you say stood out the most?
It really is tough, because we just recently, not so long, did one with Roy Jones. It was a 2-part show that was just great, and I guess because Roy, was a broadcaster, he was really good. Nothing like being in there with Tyson. Floyd was excellent in really articulating what makes him so special. Bernard was maybe my favorite, because when I thought of the in-ring segment, I got to be honest with you, it was with Bernard in mind, because when I watched Bernard fight, I kind of always understood what Bernard was doing. Setting traps, subtle things that would escape most broadcasters, and dirty tactics or illegal tactics or whatever. I marveled, because he was such a... I used to tell people years and years and years ago that Bernard Hopkins was a better fighter than Roy Jones. This was way before Jones ever lost his first fight. I used to tell people, because he was more skilled. He wasn't the athlete that Roy was. And later we would find out, once Roy slowed down just a little bit, lost some of his reflexes, and his chin was exposed. And here Bernard is becoming the oldest guy ever. I said this years ago. And so getting in the ring with him and having him really explain everything, and there's probably a lot that didn't even air. That probably was my favorite. Just a habit I can't get away from.
Now let me ask you this. If a boxer didn't agree to go in the ring with you, would you still have a segment with them?
If it's a guy, we didn't do an in-ring with Joe Frazier because Joe was in a wheelchair, obviously. So there are guys who, aren't Ken Norton. Oh, no, we did one with Ken Norton. That's right, I forgot. We couldn't today probably, but we did when we filmed the show with Ken. There were a couple of guys who were still waiting on the in-ring segments. One big name I won't even mention because I'll get angry, but he came prepared to do the in-ring, and his PR person pulled him away before he did it, so he's promised to still do one, and there have been a couple instances like that. But if they're able and refuse to do it for a real good reason, be it an injury or a fight coming up and they'll promise later, but if they flat out refuse to do it, then I would not interview them. It would be a deal breaker, yes. Because there's too many great ones that have done it, and we're there to make them look good and for them to explain their craft. So the way I feel about it, if Floyd can do it, if Manny can do it, if Mike can do it, if Aaron Pryor can do it, then who the hell should turn us down?
Have you ever had a non-boxer on your show?
Angelo Dundee, Emmanuel Stewart have both been featured in this corner, and those are the two that come to mind. Haven't done segments with broadcasters yet. We had planned that already, but we're just so busy. I mean, as much as I love sitting down with other broadcasters, and I do, Yeah, I went and I was in.
You had Joe Cortez, didn't you?
Joe Cortez. Look at that. You're you know more than I do about this. Yeah, Joe Cortez is another one. But we're so busy with the fighters that we're trying to get. You know, we're going to reach our goal pretty soon here of 52 half-hour episodes. You know, and so we really try to pack on the fighters. But yeah, there's a lot of room for other people like referees you mentioned, and trainers, and other people, and obviously broadcasters.
Does that all happen in the same day from your interview and then your in-ring?
Could be split up into different months at times, but normally it's the same day. A lot of the times, a great example was Sugar Shane Mosley. When we did Shane, we shot the interview. This was when Pacquiao was getting ready to fight Cotto, and we shot it at the MGM, looking down on the ring, and then right after the interview, we jumped into went to the restroom, jumped into our warm-ups, and HBO, it was kind enough to let us use the ring, just like Showtime has been, and we jumped inside the ring and did it. So we like to get it done right then and there because it's more fluid, and a lot of the times during the interview we're talking about the style, and I'll set some of this stuff up in the interview, and even though some of it never makes air, just to get the fighter prepared for what I'm going to ask him when we get inside the ring.
Your show has obviously gone far since when it first started. How do you think it happened, and what are you the most proud of?
We have a number of goals. Well, the first one I already mentioned to you, to have a Latin version of the program. We also plan to do some documentaries. I've written one movie that I'm really excited about, a boxing movie that I'm approaching a few people, totally different than any boxing movie that's ever been out there. What I'm most proud of is back to April the 1st, 2004, just having a vision and having an idea and seeing it come to fruition by the grace of God, because, again, we weren't blessed with silver spoons, and what the mind can conceive and you believe you can achieve. And so that's, what I'm most proud of, is that I had an idea and I followed through with hard work and a little bit of luck and prayer. We were able to make it happen. 7.5 years later, we're still on the air, adding markets, adding affiliates, adding shows, and people like yourself that, have seen it, enjoy it, and, so those are the things that are important.
Have you ever thought of having a full feature documentary or some kind of bio-type feature film with compilation of your many guests that you've had?
Again, I guess my goals would be more, again, documentary style. That's a good. You might have. You're probably going to want to cut if I do that for coming up. That's a good idea. What I'm more so interested is documentary styled programming where you much like 24/7 does, where you go to Ireland, do something on Irish fighters, go to Puerto Rico, do something on Puerto Rican fighters, go to Culiacan, do something on it, but do it right, those are things. The movie I wrote was just something that I worked on that's totally separate, and I wish I could even give you some. It's better than The Fighter, I can tell you that, as good as The Fighter was. So we're excited about that. But what you just mentioned, there's so much room for programming right now. Everything's, TV's changing, Internet's changing. Content is very valuable, and we have so much content, there. But again, if you don't narrowcast a little bit and set it up, it'll just be random ideas. So, there's only so much you can do at a time. But that is an interesting thing. That we have, again, so much, but that would have to be written out and done. We're going to do some, for example, compilation shows, and also, and this has been done, this next thing is not my idea, but I also would love to do a few shows, and I thought of a couple, and I can't do them, the ones I wanted to do, that I wanted to do Alexis Arguello and Aaron Pryor together. I wanted to do Ward and Gotti together, and there's a few other ones. But there's still one that I want to do, and both fighters are around. They're both alive. They've both done my show, and I probably would be the only guy that could get them both together. So that's one I have in mind as well. So it's a continued body of. I've done interviews with Manny Pacquiao on the internet, where the next day or a couple days later, there's hundreds of thousands of views. I quite honestly, I believe the fans are more zealous. They're more passionate. And just like the Tecate Cerveza con Carácter, there's a love, and I actually think that a show, my exact show, in that in Spanish would be very popular, and people wouldn't miss it because see, the fans, the young Latins aren't, in my opinion, deluded by MMA, and I could be wrong, but I still feel boxing is the thing.
Right. You're absolutely right.
And young kids growing up today, or younger kids, it makes me feel so good when a young man, and I try to answer all fan mail and everything, because now MMA is, taking over the terrestrial television, and so I think in Latin America, whether it be Mexico or even if it was Puerto Rico, I think if In This Corner was on and I'm sitting there with Trinidad, or I'm in the ring with Trinidad, or I'm in the ring with Morales, the whole damn family's going to sit around and watch.
Not only that, but you got to understand that Tecate has a big, Telefutura Friday Night Fights is pretty much equal to ESPN Friday Night Fights here. And it has such a big Latin base. And it's sponsored by Tecate. So if you have Tecate on your side, I'm sure they could get you your connections to Telefutura, which could probably broadcast a show like that after their Friday night fights or before, and you could get that crowd there.
Well, it's in the works. Yep, I agree, and one of my goals is to sit, with him down in some, hopefully, because I would imagine some raggedy Jim and Culiacan, and where it all started, and that's what I look. I've been to Mexico City, I've been to Puerto Rico, I've been all over the place, but to actually do long form programming, and I have, again, nobody has more respect for Ricardo Lopez, for example, than I do, and I saw him at the Hall of Fame this year, and I went up and I said, I'm one of the biggest fans of yours and can't wait to do an entire show, and I could see how he lit up, and somehow, I guess it's YouTube, all the Latin fighters, they all know me as the little blonde guy. I'm about their size, so we meshed pretty well together.
You got to think, Ricardo Lopez went undefeated just like Marciano did. He retired undefeated, and he had one draw, I think was his only little setback, but he didn't lose.
With Rosendo Alvarez, I think I was at, yeah.
Right, and then, of course, he won the rematch.
He won the rematch.
So I think that would be great. I think it would be awesome if you had some kind of show like that on the Spanish channel, to see Smitty there interviewing somebody on a Spanish station.
As long as Tecate Supplies the Chicas can be part of the show, then we're in.
So if you were doing anything in boxing like you are right now, what do you think you'd be doing?
You know what? I would have probably been Don Johnson on Miami Vice or something. I probably would have been an actor if I could go back and do it all over again. Because all the great actors, not all, but a lot of the great actors appear to be little guys like me, and maybe because they all have a chip on their shoulder or an ego or something. And probably acting, something in that form. I think, because I enjoy being, thank God my daughter's doing so great. She just left for North Carolina School of the Arts, and she's an actress, and probably something along that line.
Do you remember your first interview, and did that come natural to you?
Yeah, I was on TV as a young kid. On Paul Warfield would have me on his TV show as a little kid, and he had me on it radio on WGBS. And the first radio show I did, I think, was Fred Hickman, who worked with the late Nick Charles at CNN. Fred had become a buddy of mine over the phone, and he was a CNN broadcaster at the time. And I think Fred was my first radio guest. The first guy I interviewed, I got a bunch of TV, and it was just a radio interview, but I got some television station, was Tommy Hearns when he was getting ready to fight Marvin Hagler the first time. Yeah, the only time. Back then, I went down and interviewed Tommy Hearns, who was training in Florida, and I went around to different television stations and said, hey, do you be the first one to have this interview and play it, and then I'll come on and go on, preceding the fight and after the fight, and that's what I did. And a guy named Yuki Washington, who went on to become a pretty big sportscaster, he was at, I think, the NBC affiliate in Fort Myers and had me do it. So
can you share who's upcoming as far as on your show?
The plan, we have plans for Tim Bradley, Amir Khan, Andre Ward. Those are new shows. Probably something with Zab Judah, because we've never done it, and Zab lives here, and maybe Sweet Pea Whitaker, but those ones I just mentioned. But then coming out right away will be shows that are already shot. Will be Smokin' Joe Frazier, tribute to Diego Chico Corrales, Mickey Ward, Kosh Yazoo, Aaron Pryor, George Chuvalo, the former great Canadian heavyweight who was never knocked down, despite the fact that he fought the trilogy of Ali, Frazier, and Foreman, and many others, and an actual generic show on the International Boxing Hall of Fame. We did a 2011 show that ran already just about this year's inductions, but there will be a generic one just about the Hall of Fame itself. So that's what's coming up, and when you add up the additions, the additional ones that I mentioned, and special shows for Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao leading up to their fights, and should take us right up into the new year. So we've got plenty in store, and plenty of, as I mentioned, stuff that I broke to you, that you got the scoop on the plans for In This Corners.
What is your opinion on the state of boxing at this moment?
There's a lot of things that need to be done. Amateur program needs to be improved. We need to go back to some of the things that made it so special. 15-round fights for major championships at least. Probably should go back to same-day weigh-ins, because then we would really have guys fighting where they need to be. We want and need the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight to happen. It's a disgrace that it hasn't happened yet. They should be already getting ready to fight 2 or 3 times. But we have had we are, the Latino fighters, and what's going on in Europe and in Canada and the Philippines. There's a lot of great stuff going on, and so boxing is doing okay. But in this country, we need to get back to, again, the amateur program, so more kids. A lot of our next heavyweight champion was most likely playing on Saturday or Sundays, or playing in the NBA or playing for the Ravens or something. And I really do believe so goes boxing, so goes the heavyweight division, at least in this country. So we need to find the next heavyweight champion. That's a mission that I'm on, and that's all I'm going to say about it, because you'll hear more about something coming up in the weeks and months to come, but that's kind of where we're at with it, and but as a whole, you asked me worldwide, boxing's doing great.
What do you think of MMA?
Well, fighters can't tap out. That's one thing that I can say. It is. I'll be kind. I'll try to be kind. My son said it best. I think backup linebacker who was a good wrestler in high school, backup high school football player who was a good wrestler, could go on, learn skills, develop his wrestling, and he could someday win an MMA title and even a UFC title. That same kid will not ever be welterweight champion of the world. I think and I think because there's so many skills, forms, what's the word they use, techniques, or I forgot the word that they used. I've been offered to call some MMA fights, and I turned them all down because I'm not an expert on it. There's so many different techniques and systems that's why they're never really great at any one, because you have to watch out for the arm bar, watch out for the takedown, or watch out, and they all punch for they're terrible at striking. The ones that do strike well usually win, because very few of them have a great chin. But you know what? By and large, they'll always beat a fighter inside the ring with a fighter. Just like Muhammad Ali told me once that a wrestler would probably always would beat him, in a street fight, unless he landed the first punch.
I remember when he got in the ring with Antonio
Inoki. Yeah.
And I think he got some kind of a really bad cut or some on his leg due to his kicks or whatever, and he almost had his leg amputated from what I hear.
Ferdy Pacheco said that was the start of the beginning of the end for Ali, because it affected him in a lot of different ways. And I worked with WCW. You mentioned wrestlers a few times. I worked with WCW. They were one of my main sponsors for years, and I had such a they're before Goldberg ever made the Monday night show, they would always have them come on my show to prep up and interview, and did live remotes. WCW for a decade I got guys like Diamond Dallas Page in wrestling, and because I used to always have wrestlers on my radio show going back to Captain Lou and the late Captain Lou and Sergeant Slaughter and all
I wish I would have known this before I left boxing.
We'll save that for another.
My biggest love was wrestling. mean,
I could tell. I knew it. I never should have brought this up because we're running out of time. But we'll save that for another show.
Okay.
But the point is, I always told people that a professional wrestler could win a UFC title, and everybody laughed at me. And what happens? A guy named Brock Lesnar, if I'm not mistaken, I think he won. I know he's lost, but I think he won the heavyweight championship.
Well, not only that, win or lose, whether he win or lose, he's still going to have the big name, where he's still going to be the biggest draw.
And let me tell you this, as a guy, and we'll end on this, but guys like the late Chris Benoit or an Eddie Guerrero,
right,
another late great, those guys probably would have won UFC titles because nobody's tougher than professional wrestlers. I mean, I've been out with these guys. I've gone out all night with Ric Flair, and trust me, nobody's tougher than those guys.
Yeah, hey, just remind me on the next show we're going to do talking about your party life and who you went and partied with.
Yeah, and didn't learn Spanish. That's it. But I tell you something, those guys, and so listen, I have a lot of respect for what Dana White and them are doing marketing. They're doing a great job. I guess they just signed with Fox, and their boxing could really learn. Because if I was doing my show and it was MMA, they would be kissing my you-know-what to have to do. And
I like how he's a sole dictator, and he says you two are going to fight, and that's it. Not like now where all the politics, this guy's your promoter,
right,
this guy's your promoter, and all that gets involved. And
but do I think that they're Sugar Ray Robinson? Do I think that they're Jack Dempsey, Muhammad Ali, Manny Pacquiao? No. Is it too early in the game to say that? Of course it is.
Right.
But I also think, a lot of these young white tattooed kids, I wonder whether they're going to stick with it. I wonder, because nobody seems, Fedor lasted and Liddell, but once they go, they have a steep decline, and I just wonder if it'll have the staying power. Everybody says it will because the kids today are getting all into it and whatever, but you know what? I came in this way, and I'm a boxing guy, and if I have a choice of even Monday Night Raw over MMA, I'm going to watch wrestling because at least it's entertaining, and I think they're just as tough, if not tougher than most of those guys, because they don't tap out. They get tapped out by the referee. It's choreography, but let me tell you something. You asked me about, because I thought Mean Gene Okerlund and Bobby the Brain both tried to get me to become a broadcaster, with them, and I turned it down because I knew that these big guys would be throwing me all around, and I didn't want to get thrown around. And I can tell you, I've been in the ring with Tyson, but what would scare me more, and I've woken up to this nightmare before because I interviewed him. He was do you remember Big Van Vader?
Right.
Can you imagine being if I was?
But yeah, I remember who he is.
He wore the mask, and he was.
Right.
Can you imagine? Yeah, Can you imagine if I was doing an in this corner in-ring segment with wrestlers, and I had to get on the ground and let him simulate jumping off, flipping over the double flip, and coming down? Let me tell you something. I've been ringside at many Halloween Havocs and other. There's a lot of mistakes made. You can't fake. I'll tell you one quick story, and then we're done. I'm at the bar at the MGM Grand one night. I won't mention the wrestler. And after
top 10 wrestler.
Oh, well, he was yes.
Okay, yeah.
A WCW wrestler.
Okay.
And some guy, a fan, comes up, and the wrestler and myself had been drinking, and the fan comes up and says, "Hey, show me how you fake those chest slaps." And this wrestler proceeded to backhand this guy and knocked him all the way across the bar, over a table, almost knocked him out with a chest slap, and he basically, the guy never really was able to make it back over because he was hurt. Not bad, but and the wrestler said, "That's the way we fake it," meaning a lot of the stuff wasn't fake. And I have a tremendous respect for professional wrestlers. And
well, thank you, Smitty, for being here. Thank you very much, and maybe we could do it again.
I appreciate it.
All right, thank you very much, Smitty.
Okay, bud.
Thank you.